The first rule Elara learned was simple: survive by being smaller than the room. She folded herself into corners, into shadows, into the quiet that let other people forget you existed. People didn't ask questions when you were a soft shape with downcast eyes and a slate to write on. They only dropped orders and silverware and sometimes insults. She let those pass through her like wind through dry reeds. By law she was property. A hybrid girl stamped Omega on a ledger that decided where she slept and how hard she worked. Wolf blood made her bones quick to heal. Vampire blood made her night vision sharp as glass. Both made her beautiful in a way that irritated cruel people and made kind ones nervous. It was easier to look at beauty when it came with a voice, a personality, a person. Elara gave them none. She signed clumsy gestures, nodded, kept her head angled as if listening hurt. When she had to answer, she wrote with neat strokes on a chipped slate. Yes, no, done, sorry. In 5 years she hadn't spoken a word. The kitchen sat low under the eastern courtyard, hot as a forge, loud as a market. Elara moved through steam like a ghost, ladling broth, clearing platters, reading lips. The new scullion, a boy with a nervous laugh, dropped a tray of pewter cups on purpose, just to see if she would flinch. She didn't. She was already crouched to help him, before the echo finished chasing itself down the stone hall. He mouthed, "Sorry, I didn't think," and she smiled with her eyes, and pressed a cup into his hand, and left him with the feeling that he had tested something sacred, and it had not broken. Above them, the fortress of Blackspire woke like a giant animal. Banners rippling, iron gates groaning, the slow thunder of a city coming alive. The Alpha Vampire King had returned at dawn, or so the guards said. His name rolled through the kitchens like electricity, Darius Vale. 2 syllables and a shiver. Elara kept chopping herbs, fingers going steady, but her stomach pulled tight like a wire. The bond never truly slept. For 5 years she had kept it tamped down, buried under routine and exhaustion, and a silence she made holy. When Darius moved within the walls, something in her lungs wanted to breathe deeper, and something in her throat wanted to open. Not yet. Not ever, she told her body, and the blade kept its rhythm against the board. At midday a palace steward came with his stiff mouth and stiff shoes, and an order written for her and only her. Her name wasn't on it. Slaves didn't get names on paper. Instead, kitchen girl with dark hair, the one who doesn't talk, bring the wine to the council chamber. Service was short. Someone had been dragged to the cells, and the others refused to go that close to the throne without a coin bonus. Elara wiped her hands and picked up the carved tray, and tried not to think about how much closer to him this would take her. The council chamber was a knife of a room. Narrow, high, windows like arrow slits, a long table of black stone polished, till you could see your own reluctance in it. Councillors sat like chess pieces, a high priestess in red silk, 2 generals in muted grey, a woman whose jewelry clinked when she shifted. They all smelled like money and worry. And at the head of the table, not sitting but leaning with both hands braced like a fighter measuring distance, was the king. His presence didn't feel like a surprise. It felt like walking into a storm you'd been hearing all morning. Darius Vale had the kind of stillness that made other people check their heartbeat. He wore no crown, only a simple iron band at his wrist, and a shirt dark from recent riding. He had the tired eyes of a man who slept in armor, and the quiet control of someone who knew what all his blades could do. When the door closed behind Elara, he looked up. The world narrowed. Not dramatic, not mystical. Just that sudden sense that everything you think is important can't compete with the single fact of someone else existing in the same air as you. Elara lowered her eyes. She wasn't afraid of his gaze. She was afraid of what her body would do if she let herself really feel it. She set the tray down and began pouring in a clean, economical sequence. Priestess, general, jeweled woman, and only then the king. She could feel his attention the way you feel sunlight on your skin in winter. No heat, but the promise of it. When she reached him, he spoke to a counselor, without taking his eyes off the map. The word was numbers, supply routes, a name she didn't know. His mouth moved like an order carried on smoke. His voice lived only in the lips and throat she watched. She listened like that, the way she always did, catching meaning from breath and jaw and tension. She poured. The bottle caught on the etched rim of his goblet, scraped faintly, He glanced at the sound with a quick precision that made her pulse jump. She steadied her hands. The priestess was already complaining about timing. The red moon came in 6 nights. The Blood Council wanted a public claiming at the ball. Tradition and law. The words were stones dropped into the room. Darius didn't look impressed. "I will choose," he said, and his mouth shaped it like something he had decided 5 years ago, and was bored of repeating. "I will not choose poorly." Choose meant a mate. Claim meant a bite under the goddess's eye, and a vow loud enough to crush dissent. Elara's chest felt too small. The compact said a king who didn't claim a mate by his 7th winter on the throne forfeited the right to rule. 7 years. He was at the edge of the law's patience. The law did not allow for a hybrid. The law did not imagine a girl pretending not to hear the world, so it could not demand anything of her. The jeweled woman, Lady Marceline, said something about pure bloodlines and alliances and doors that closed forever if he chose badly. The room smelled of fear, covered in perfume. Darius watched the map as if answers could be found between rivers and borders and ink. Elara set the bottle back on the tray and turned to leave with the quiet ease of someone who had been leaving rooms her whole life. "Wait," the king said. It wasn't to her. He was looking at the priestess, but the word caught her anyway. She stopped, because slaves stopped when power moved the air. And because every nerve in her body had wired itself to that voice, the one she had never let herself hear. She kept her face blank, and her eyes low. "The ball will proceed," Darius said. "The council will not announce names in advance." He flicked a look at Marceline that might have been a warning. "I won't have the court place bets on my crown." He never raised his volume. He didn't need to. Everyone leaned in to listen, because listening felt like a privilege he could revoke. The priestess asked for a sign of goodwill toward the Blood Council, a private audience tonight with the short list of potential consorts. The words private audience did ugly things in Elara's stomach. She picked up the tray and backed away, and the king finally looked straight at her. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was just aware of the people around him, aware like a wolf counts exits. But the gaze hit like recognition, and an ache she had kept under saltweed and habit rose in her throat. She did nothing. She had trained for nothing. She left the room cleanly and without so much as a breath, out of rhythm. In the hall the steward took the tray and gave her another. The king's private wine, a darker bottle with a wax seal and a filigree label. "To the library," he mouthed. The library sat 3 floors above the kitchens, with windows that held the sky. She climbed with the bottle pressed to her ribs, like a secret that could cut. Blackspire's library smelled like old paper, and cold stone and hearth smoke from the small fire someone had coaxed into the grate. The room was empty of people and full of maps. Elara set the wine on a side table and stood for a second that was mostly about catching her breath. When she turned, Darius Vale was in the doorway watching her. She didn't startle, she didn't drop anything, she just knew, in that way the body knows, when a storm changes direction, that she had been alone and then she wasn't. He stepped inside and shut the door to give the illusion of privacy. Power did not need walls. It carried its own room wherever it went. He crossed to the table with his steady predator walk, and looked at the wine without picking it up. "You're not on the household roster for the library," he said, like he was idly thinking aloud. Elara tilted her head a fraction. Her slate hung at her hip. She considered reaching for it, decided not to. He knew. Of course he knew. Kings counted. They kept ledgers in their head. "I asked for the red from the western vineyards," he went on, mouth shaping the words with an easy control that made everything else in the room seem sloppy. "This one is eastern. Close, but not the same." Elara's heart did the stupid thing. It tried to speak. She reached for the bottle to pour. He put 2 fingers lightly on the neck to stop her. Not rough. Not possessive. More like he was testing what would happen if he touched the story she had wrapped around herself. "Your hands don't shake," he said, watching them anyway. She let her mouth soften into a polite confusion that suggested she didn't understand, then let her eyes lower in the careful way of a servant who has learned when to be invisible. She reached for the slate. "Chalk ready. Apologies, correct bottle. I will fetch it now." "Don't," he said, and that one word found every unguarded place in her. It wasn't a command exactly, it was an invitation to stay and betray everything she built. She froze. The slate stayed blank. He stepped back to lean on the edge of the table. His gaze flicked over her face, not with hunger but with assessment, the way you study a puzzle that isn't trying to trick you but refuses to be easy. "They say you can't hear," he said. "But I've seen people tell you 3 things at once and you catch all 3. You move before they finish asking." Elara kept her breathing even. The trick was to keep your silence gentle, not defiant. He gestured toward the hearth. A log shifted and fell. The soft collapse would have made most people glance. Elara did not. Her training had years of dropped plates in it, a lifetime's practice in letting the world break, and not reacting to the sound. "You see," he said. Not a question. She blinked slowly. The slate chalk scratched one word in neat letters she didn't look down at as she wrote it. "Sorry." He didn't glance. He was watching her mouth instead, the way it shaped breath, how it held itself around a secret. "If you're deaf," he said, "who taught you to read tone?" Tone wasn't mouth, it was shoulders and eyes, and the way someone's weight changed when they got close to something they cared about. She had learned it to save herself. She had learned it because the first time you answer a question no one asked out loud, you also learn how to apologize without your lips moving. He reached for the bottle again, and this time moved it out of her reach. "The Blood Council wants a spectacle," he said, switching subjects so fast anyone else would be catching up for 3 sentences. "They want to parade pureblood families and sell a throne like it's a horse at market. You know what they don't want?" He let the silence fill in the answer. Elara didn't. That was the hardest part, letting a question hang when you could answer it easily. "They don't want me to do what I actually intend to do," he said, "which is choose the person who will keep this empire from eating itself alive. Who sees the thing before it happens." His mouth softened, not with a smile, but with something like memory. "Someone who listens." Elara stood too straight. He noticed that too. "How long have you been pretending?" he asked. Very quiet now. She stared at the fire. A splinter crackled. A small spark bit the air. She didn't move. The chalk broke under her thumb. A piece fell to the carpet, with no sound anyone would notice, except a man who had trained himself to notice. He glanced down and back up. 5 years, he guessed. The records would say 4. They're always late to recognize the truth. Her throat hurt. The body is a treacherous thing. It keeps score even when the mind refuses to write the numbers down. She thought of the morning they took her father. How the bells did not stop ringing because they were part of the ritual, and rituals never care about the person inside them. The door to the library banged open before she could betray herself by breathing differently. Lady Marceline swept in with frost on her lashes, and the confidence of someone who had long ago decided the world owed her favors. She stopped when she saw Elara and gave her a look the court reserved for Staines. "Majesty, your council waits. Also, the seamstresses need measurements for the consort's gowns." Darius didn't look away from Elara. "Then let them measure each other," he said, and the amused surprise in his voice was real. Marceline's jewelry made a tiny angry sound. "We can't keep the Blood Council waiting, Darius." "Then don't," he said, finally turning. "Go entertain them with a sermon about old laws. Tell them the king heard a better one." Marceline's smile cooled several degrees. Her gaze slid back to Elara, cataloguing bone structure with the practiced cruelty of a woman who had made beauty a weapon. "You spill on that map and I'll have your hands," she mouthed as if Elara couldn't possibly understand. Darius's face didn't change, but the air did. "I'll be down," he said. "Close the door." Marceline obeyed, though her heels clicked hard on the stone. When the door clicked, Darius straightened, and Elara felt the room change back. He picked up the Eastern bottle and weighed it. "You can go," he said. "Take that with you. And bring the right one next time." Next time was an admission he had not finished. Next time was a life she was not certain she could survive. Elara carried the wine back down steps that had measured more important feet. She put the bottle gently where it belonged on a shelf with 6 identical brothers and stood in the storeroom breathing through the shake that wanted to happen. She didn't let it. She walked to the washtubs and scoured pots until her hands went red. She waited for the shift bell and went to the linens and folded sheets into perfect white wolves. She let the body work until the mind quieted. Night came soft on the city, hard on the keep. Elara's pallet lay in a narrow barracks room with 10 other cots, and a window the size of a hand. She lay awake, and tried not to imagine the ball and the red moon and a king standing on a balcony with a stranger and calling it tradition. She promised herself it would be fine. She would be in the kitchens carrying trays back and forth. She would keep her head down and let fate write in someone else's ink. At dawn, a runner, with an armful of laundry, grabbed her wrist and pulled her into motion. "Lady Marceline wants the library shelves dusted before noon," he mouthed, panting. "And she said to send the quiet one." Of course she did. Elara climbed again, carrying a soft cloth and a little brush for corners where the past holds dust. She told herself she would not be alone up there. She told herself she would do the job and leave and never add any piece of herself to the room. She told herself a lot of reasonable lies. Darius was already there. He'd slept badly. She could tell because he had a new crease between the brows, and because his shirt was clean but his jaw wasn't. He looked like a man who had negotiated with a wall all night, and finally agreed to go around it, just to see what happened. He didn't send her away. He didn't speak. She started at the far bay, and worked shelf by shelf. He pretended to read, and didn't. The quiet built a bridge between them plank by plank. She reached the atlas section and pulled down a book that bore her mother's handwriting inside the front cover. The shock hit like a slap. Elara froze with her thumb on a familiar curve of ink. She hadn't seen that script in 8 years. A name stitched itself in the air: Alice Wyn. The surname she'd given herself was close enough to remind, far enough to hide. The book slipped. It wasn't dramatic. It slid, and tapped the table and tilted toward the floor. She snatched for it with a reflex she didn't have to plan, and the relief at catching it stung like tears. A small sound escaped her. Nothing. A breath. A little yes of victory you let out for yourself when no one's listening. He heard it. His head snapped up so fast it would have been funny if it hadn't meant the end of everything. Elara's hand tightened on the book until the leather groaned. Darius watched her mouth the way he had watched the door and the map, like the right move would show if he waited. She closed her lips and pressed them into the quiet she had worn for 5 years. Too late. "Say it again," he said. Not loud. Not a command. A man trying a door he wasn't sure he wanted to open. Elara shook her head. She took a step back and hit a shelf with her spine. He came around the table, slow, like approaching a wounded thing you don't want to startle. She couldn't look at him. She stared at his hands instead. They were a king's hands if a king had to do his own work. Strength without ornament, small scars like punctuation. "Everyone lies," he said. "They just choose different parts to bury." Elara's fingers tightened on the atlas until the leather creaked. She could pretend the sound she'd made hadn't happened. She could nod like a well-trained shadow and go back to dusting maps as if her pulse wasn't rioting. That had been her plan for 5 years. Outlast the question until the question got bored and left. He didn't leave. He waited with that warrior's patience that said he could stand here for an hour, a day, long enough for the truth to give itself up just to get some rest. She shook her head once. Not a no to him, just a no to her own body. "Don't open. Don't ruin this." "Say it again," he asked, softer now. "Anything." She swallowed. The words in her throat felt like flint and steel. If she spoke, everything changed. If she didn't, everything stayed the same, which was another kind of death. "Please don't," she whispered. It came out like a breath you can't hold anymore, the smallest sound. But to him it might as well have been thunder. She watched it hit, pupils flaring, control tightening, the faintest tremor in the air like a string pulled taut. Vampires heard more than sound. Wolves felt more than touch. Kings learned to hide both. He didn't hide fast enough. He exhaled, slow. "There you are." Elara wanted to deny it. Deny herself. Deny him. Deny the shape of the room that suddenly seemed to fit them both too well. She set the atlas on the table so she wouldn't drop it, and stepped sideways into the safer part of the library, distance the only trick left. "Why pretend?" he asked. "Because the world loves to break beautiful things. Because a collar looks the same whether it's iron or a promise. Because the first time the bond tugged, a bell was ringing for her father, and she thought if she cut her voice out of her body, fate would stop calling her by name. None of that would fit on a slate. She lifted her hand, palm out. Stop. She found the slate anyway and wrote neatly, "I need to work." He read it, then her face, then the half a dozen lies under her skin. "You're safe in this room," he said. Safe wasn't a word Blackspire used much. It made people greedy. "No one is safe in your rooms," she said, before she could catch it back, and then she felt foolish because it sounded braver than she felt. Instead of being offended, he almost smiled. "Fair." The door cracked open again, and the steward's anxious face appeared. "Majesty, the council." "Tell them I'm on my way," Darius said without looking, and the door closed like the castle itself was learning manners. He straightened. If he'd come any closer, the Bond would have taken over the conversation, and he knew it. "When I return," he said, "I'm going to ask your name." "Not in public," she said. It wasn't a request, not exactly. It was a line she had to draw with the only weapon she trusted: boundaries. "Not in public," he agreed. His gaze caught on the thin white scar along her wrist, one most people missed, because they didn't look at slaves long enough to see details. He didn't ask about it. He moved like he wanted to, then stopped like he'd remembered she didn't owe him anything. "Don't speak to anyone else," he added, the king slipping through the man for a beat. "Not even a word, please." She wanted to laugh, as if words were something she could hand out by mistake now that they'd learned the way out. Instead, she nodded once. He left, and the library felt bigger right away, which should have been a relief. It wasn't. Elara put the atlas back where it belonged, and finished dusting the shelf with hands that knew how to work, while the rest of her fell apart. A small, mean voice in her head said, "You lasted 5 years and then tripped over a book." Another part answered, "You also kept yourself alive 5 years in a world that wanted you quiet or dead. Call it even." By the time the sun had dragged itself behind the west wall, the keep was buzzing about the ball. Seamstresses scurried with armfuls of color. Musicians tuned. Servants prepped trays taller than some of the pages. Elara tried to blend into the 100 chores that needed doing. It was always easier to be a ghost when everyone else was busy pretending to be important. In the laundry court, a girl named Miri tugged Elara's sleeve and spoke slowly, kindly, like you do when you're used to being ignored. "They say the king will announce her at midnight," she mouthed. "Some pureblood from the eastern houses, pale, pretty, sharp as a knife under all the lace." Elara gave her a little tilt of the head that could mean anything. Miri leaned closer, conspiratorial. "If it's Lady Marceline, I'll jump in the river. She scares the soap." Elara almost smiled. She'd watched Miri give away her bread more times than sense allowed. Kindness made you a little stupid, but it made other people want you to live. A bell pealed once, twice, the signal for last preparations. Elara carried a crate of candles toward the southern stairs, and ran into John Corvin, the king's lieutenant with grey in his hair and a permanent squint. Like sunlight, bothered him even indoors. He stopped her without touching, one palm lifted. "You," he said, exaggerating his mouth. "With me." She pointed at the candles. "Leave them," he said. "The Queen of Wax can wait." He walked. She followed, because you follow the man who keeps the king alive. Jun didn't glance back to see if she had, which told her he already knew she would. He cut through a service hall no one in velvet used, and pushed open a heavy door into a small armory that smelled like oil and iron and old arguments. He shut them inside and leaned his shoulder against the door, like he'd hold back a siege if he had to. "I need to ask you a question," he said, carefully, like each word might be a trap. "And you will answer me by shaking your head or nodding. Nothing more." She stared at the notch in the floor where some long-ago sword had taken a bite. "Do you understand?" he asked. She nodded. "Did anyone force you to break your silence today?" She shook her head. "Did anyone threaten you if you didn't?" She shook her head again, slower. He breathed out. "Good." He studied her like a map he didn't want to misread. "Do you know what happens if the wrong person learns your secret?" She nodded once. "Do you know what happens if the right person does?" That one made her hesitate. She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She didn't know. Jun's mouth twitched. "Fair." He straightened from the door. "Listen. You're about to step into a room where politics pretends to be a party. Stay near the west wall. If anyone tries to separate you from that wall, drift the other way." If someone touches you, make it look like you tripped and need to pick something up. The floor is full of convenient nothings. Understand?" She nodded, a little bewildered by his sudden guardianship. He reached for the latch, paused. "And Elara," he said. Hearing her name out loud without a collar of mockery around it knocked the air out of her. He'd never asked. She'd never told. He'd just known, because men like Jun counted names the way they counted blades. He went on, simple as a prayer. "You're not alone in this keep." He opened the door and left her with that, which felt kinder than anything. She stood still until her heartbeat got bored and walked away, then went back to the candles because someone would shout if they didn't make it to the ballroom on time. The ball unfolded like a story the court had practiced, since before there were walls to echo it. Chandeliers cut light into diamonds, musicians braided sound into the high air. The Blood Council glided like cold fire through a crowd that parted out of reflex. Women wore gowns, designed to look effortless and engineered to win wars. Men wore smiles like armor. The red moon hadn't risen yet, but the room was already drunk on the idea of it. Elara hugged the west wall as instructed, a tray balanced on her palm, the weight, a useful anchor. She moved like water on marble, around clusters of laughter, past the clump of courtiers orbiting Marceline, through the gap left by two generals bluffing each other with compliments. She didn't look for the king. He occupied a room without needing to be seen. You felt when he drew nearer. The temperature shifted a half degree. The first time the bond tugged, she was near the musicians. A string snapped, and a violinist hissed, and Elara's head lifted because some sounds live in muscles, not ears. She didn't turn. She didn't have to. He was behind her and to the left, a presence pulling the edges of the room into focus, and every fine hair on her arm stood up like silver grass in wind. "Wine," someone said to her, not him, a lord with two red lips, and a habit of letting his eyes land 2 inches lower than her face. She poured for him without spilling, and drifted away before he decided she was entertainment. The game of being invisible required you to be very, very good at being seen just long enough to leave. Darius didn't address her. He moved the way weather does, changing the room by existing. He accepted congratulations like he was checking them for traps, listened to the high priestess with the respectful blankness of a man having his blood drawn, let Marceline laugh into his shoulder without giving her anything back. He wasn't cruel. He simply refused to be consumed by the court's hunger. When the red moon lifted slow and low over the eastern windows, a hush fell that even the drunkest noble could feel. The priestess stepped forward for the ritual blessing, a knife flickering in her hand, her smile a promise wrapped in piety. Darius extended his palm to draw the ceremonial line of blood. Elara's tray felt suddenly too light. The bond pulled. No, not pulled. Reached. And she knew in a way that didn't require lessons that if he bled onto that altar tonight under this sky before the goddess's eyes, whatever choice he made afterward would calcify into law. Fate wasn't romantic. Fate was a document with a seal. The priestess's mouth formed words Elara didn't need to hear to understand. Tradition, purity, line. The knife kissed his skin. A single bead of blood welled, dark and bright, and then the scent hit. Even from the edge of the room, even with every trick she'd taught herself, Elara couldn't keep her body from reacting. Wolf, vampire, both halves of her snapped to attention like soldiers hearing a drum. Her pulse synced to something old and simple. She gripped the tray, but her fingers had gone slick, and one glass slid, tilted, toppled. It didn't shatter. It struck the marble with a muffled chime, and rolled in a circle like a coin, settling against the toe of a polished boot. Darius's. The nearest courtier snickered. A lady made a little disgusted shape with her mouth. Marceline didn't bother to hide her disdain. Elara crouched to retrieve the glass before someone decided to make a point of it. She kept her eyes on the floor, the tray balanced in her other hand, every inch of her trying to be nothing. "Leave it," Darius said, too quiet for most of the room to catch, exactly loud enough for every creature in her bones. Her head came up of its own accord. She looked at his mouth because that's what she did, and what she saw there wasn't mockery. It wasn't pity. It wasn't the clinical interest of a king who liked to know how everything in his domain worked. It was recognition. The same kind she'd seen in the library. Only now it was edged with decision. He turned to the priestess. "Traditions change," he said. "No ceremony in it at all. Call the blessing done." The priestess's eyes flashed. "Majesty." "Done," he repeated, and the word carried the weight of a door, slamming somewhere deep in the keep where only kings went. He stepped back from the altar, and into the path of a room that suddenly had 1,000 eyes, and one heartbeat. He didn't look at Marceline. He didn't look at the council. He looked at the girl nobody named and said, with no preamble and no salvation for either of them, "Walk with me." Elara didn't move. Couldn't. The bond made the floor feel like a river, and she wasn't sure which stones were stable, but Jun was there at her shoulder like a rumor with teeth, and a heartbeat later she was following the king out of the ballroom through a door that pretended to be part of the paneling. They stepped into a narrow gallery, where the music became a memory, and the red moon spread itself over stone like spilled wine. Darius didn't touch her. He didn't speak. He led her to the window, where the city spread dark and beautiful, and hungry below. "Say your name," he said quietly, facing the glass so that if anyone walked in, they would look like two people admiring the view. She stared at his reflection. "A man, and a crown and a choice." "Elara Wyn," she said, and the sound slid into the night, like a secret that finally got tired of hiding. He closed his eyes for just a second, something like relief and pain moving across his face in the same breath. "Elara," he repeated, and when he said it her body remembered 1,000 small things, the way she liked her tea when she could steal it, the exact place her mother used to press a kiss to her hairline, the shape of hope. Behind them, the ball swelled again, the priestess recovering, the council recalculating, Marceline sharpening a smile into a knife. The city exhaled. Darius turned his head enough that she could see the line of his jaw. "They'll come for us now," he said. "For you first." Elara's throat burned, but not with fear. "Then why call me?" "Because I don't want to lie about it anymore," he said. "And because I can't choose a crown over the truth, and still be the kind of king this place needs." "You don't even know me," she said, a sad little laugh hitching on the last word. He looked straight at her reflection, eyes steady. "I know enough." Footsteps approached, urgent and too many for a casual interruption. Jun's voice cut through first, low and controlled. "Majesty, the council requests your presence. Now." Darius didn't move. "And if I refuse?" Jun's mouth shaped a truth Elara read easily. "Then, they'll try to take it." He finally turned, offering Elara the kind of look you only get once in a life. The look that asks, "Are you ready to ruin everything for something that might save it?" She wasn't ready. No one is. But she nodded anyway. He smiled, small and fierce, like a man about to step into a storm he chose. "Stay behind me," he said. "And if anyone asks, you're with me by order of the crown." "That's not going to make them like me," she said. "It's not meant to," he answered, and opened the door back to the world that was waiting to make them both pay for the next breath. They walked into the light together. The room turned like a single body to watch. The priestess lifted her knife of a smile. Marceline's eyes glittered with the joy of a rumor about to become a weapon. The Blood Council rearranged itself to block or bless, whichever one. Elara didn't look at any of them. She watched the man who had heard her secret and not made it ugly. Somewhere above the keep, the red moon cleared the last cloud, and hung full in a sky that never promised anyone mercy, and the first bell struck midnight. The bell rang once. Then again. Each toll sank into Elara's chest like a heartbeat she couldn't control. The ballroom was no longer a place of music and silk. It was a battlefield wrapped in candlelight. The Blood Council watched from their thrones of crimson velvet. The courtiers whispered, and the sound rippled through the air like knives sharpening on stone. Darius didn't let her falter. His voice cut through the chaos, steady, unshakable. "By decree of the crown," he said, "this woman stands under royal protection. Any harm done to her is harm done to me." That was not a statement. That was a war declaration wrapped in velvet. The High Priestess's crimson eyes narrowed. "Majesty," she said, her tone smooth and poisonous. "You defy ancient law. That woman is not of pure blood." "I'm aware," Darius said, calm as if they were debating whether. "Perhaps it's time the law remembered who it was written to serve." The crowd gasped like the air itself had teeth. Elara tried to breathe, tried to shrink again, to fade into the safety of shadows, but the moment was done. The lie she had worn for 5 years was ash now. Everyone knew she could speak. Everyone had heard him claim her. There was no silence to crawl back into. Lady Marceline broke first. "You can't be serious," she spat. "A slave? A hybrid?" Her jeweled hand trembled against her fan, snapping it shut with a crack. "If you crown her, the Blood Council will burn this keep to its foundation." "Then, they should start stacking wood," Darius said. The room froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Not even the guards. Jun Corvin appeared from nowhere, his hand already resting on the hilt at his side. His gaze flicked between the king and Elara, and then to the council. "Majesty," he said low, just loud enough for Darius to hear, "you're buying a fight you can't win in daylight." Darius's jaw tightened. "Then we'll fight in the dark." He reached out. Not a command, not an order, but a quiet offering, and Elara's instincts betrayed her. She placed her hand in his. Her skin was cold. His was colder, and yet the contact burned. The air shimmered faintly, and for the first time in 2 centuries, the mark of fate glowed between a vampire king and a hybrid omega, a soft silver light spiraling from their joined hands, bright enough to make the chandeliers dim. Gasps broke across the room like fire through dry leaves. It was undeniable now, a divine mark, a fated bond, and an unforgivable crime. The High Priestess rose to her full, terrible height. "That mark is false. It cannot be sanctioned by the goddess. Hybrids cannot bond." Her voice cracked the air like thunder. "She carries cursed blood." Darius didn't flinch. "Then perhaps the goddess has changed her mind." The priestess hissed something under her breath, a prayer or a curse, and the torches around the ballroom guttered, their flames flaring blue for a heartbeat before going still. The red moon outside painted everything in silver and blood. "Elara," Darius said softly, eyes locked on hers, "walk beside me." Her throat was dry, her knees weak, but she managed to whisper, "Where?" "Anywhere that's not here." They moved together through the stunned silence. Courtiers parted. No one dared stop the king, though every eye promised this would not be forgotten. Behind them, the High Priestess's voice followed like smoke. "You cannot hide from law, Darius Vale, nor can she hide from the goddess's judgment." Elara wanted to believe him when he whispered, "We'll see." They reached the corridor, the sound of the ball falling away, until it was just the echo of boots and breath. When they reached the high tower landing, Darius stopped. For a long moment, neither spoke. The bond still glowed faintly on their joined hands, like a heartbeat written in light. Elara could feel his pulse under his skin. Too steady, too calm for a man who had just declared war on his own council. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "Shouldn't?" He laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "I've spent 7 years doing what I should. It never changed anything." "You just defied the council," she said, stepping back. "They'll come for me, for both of us." "They were already coming," he replied. "At least now they'll have to look me in the eye when they do." She stared at him, at the man everyone called the coldest king in centuries, and saw something she hadn't expected. Tiredness, yes, but also relief, as if speaking her name had lifted a weight even a crown couldn't crush. "You don't even know me," she said again, quieter this time. Darius turned toward the window. The red moon hung above the city, swollen and solemn. "You're right, I don't." He looked over his shoulder at her. "But the bond does." "The bond isn't reason," she whispered. "It's fate. It doesn't ask if we're ready." He studied her for a long time, then said, "Tell me the truth, Elara. Why did you pretend to be deaf?" Her breath caught. He deserved an answer, but every version of the truth felt dangerous. "I had a voice," she said finally, "and once I used it to beg for mercy for my father." Her throat closed around the memory. He was accused of giving shelter to wolves during the purge. "I thought if they heard me, if I begged, they'd show mercy." Darius's expression hardened, something old and bitter flashing behind his eyes. "They didn't. They hung him at the east gate," she said softly. "The priestess said my voice carried too far. She said it disturbed the ritual." Her lips trembled. "So I stopped speaking." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with understanding. When Darius finally spoke, his voice was low, almost broken. "The east gate." He swallowed. "My soldiers manned that execution." Elara looked up sharply, her heartbeat a sharp, painful drum. You ordered it? I ordered a purge, he said. I told the generals to remove anyone aiding the rogue packs. I didn't know their names. I didn't know yours. He took a step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what it would cost. The bond pulsed again. Guilt, sorrow, something deeper, and Elara's chest felt too tight to breathe. Fate had tied her to the man who had destroyed her life. She turned away, blinking hard. The goddess must hate me. She doesn't, he said. She's just cruel enough to make us look at what we've done. Their eyes met. For a moment the world was only that. Regret and recognition. Two people standing in the ashes of everything they'd lost. Then the sound of armored footsteps echoed up the stairwell. June appeared in the doorway, his expression carved from granite. Majesty, he said, the Blood Council is calling an emergency session. They've invoked the right of containment. Darius's jaw flexed. They mean to arrest her. They mean to execute her before dawn, John said flatly. The High Priestess claims she carries forbidden blood magic. Half the court believes it. Elara's pulse spiked. They can't. They can, Darius said grimly. And they will, unless we move first. John looked between them. Majesty, if you run, you abandon the crown. If I stay, I abandon her, Darius said. John exhaled through his nose. Then I suppose we'd better run quickly. The plan came together in silence. John would cover their exit through the old chapel tunnels beneath the keep. Elara would disguise herself as a priestess's aide, hooded, carrying temple scrolls. Darius would follow later, under the guise of inspecting the wards. But as Elara pulled the black cloak around her shoulders, her hands shook. If we run, she whispered, you'll lose everything. He caught her wrist gently. If I let them take you, I've already lost everything that matters. The words hit harder than they should have. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself fall into the safety of that voice. But she had spent too long surviving to trust easily. Still, when he brushed his thumb over her palm, the glow flared again, softer this time, almost tender. We'll find a way, he said. Jun checked the corridor. We don't have time for poetry, he muttered. Go. They slipped into the night through the chapel's old service passage. The tunnel smelled of damp earth and forgotten prayers. The walls glowed faintly with old runes, etched centuries ago to ward off dark spirits. Elara's heart pounded louder than her footsteps. At the far end, the tunnel opened into the ruins of the Moon Garden, a place once used for royal ceremonies, now overgrown with ivy and moonflowers. The red light from above spilled through the broken roof, painting her face in silver and scarlet. Darius stepped out behind her, cloak brushing the stone. He took one look at the sky and then at her. If the council catches us before dawn, they'll call it treason. They'll call it that either way, she said softly. He almost smiled. You're not afraid? I've been afraid every day for 5 years, she said. It stopped feeling useful. The honesty made him look at her differently, like he'd been starving for truth in a palace built on lies. He reached up, brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. The contact sent warmth crawling through her veins, but it wasn't just the bond, it was him. You should hate me, he said quietly. Maybe I do, she whispered, but fate doesn't care. He leaned closer, not to kiss her, but to rest his forehead against hers. The gesture was intimate, ancient, wolf and vampire both. For a heartbeat, they breathed the same air. Then the night shattered. A shriek split the silence, followed by the rush of wings. Dark figures poured into the garden. Priests in crimson robes, their eyes gleaming with silver fire. Behind them came Marceline, her gown torn, and her smile vicious. Did you really think you could hide from the goddess? She sneered. You brought her wrath down yourself, Majesty. Darius stepped in front of Elara, drawing the short blade at his belt. Marceline, he said evenly, don't do this. Oh, I will, she purred. You broke the law, Darius. And as a loyal subject, it's my duty to make sure the sentence is carried out. She raised her hand. The priests began chanting. The air thickened, the moonlight turning white-hot as runes flared to life around the circle. It was a binding spell, one meant to tear the bond apart. Elara felt it immediately, like claws dragging through her veins. The mark between them blazed, pain searing through her chest. She gasped, collapsing to her knees. Darius roared, the sound too raw to be human. He lunged forward, cutting through the first priest's spell circle with a single strike. The light faltered. "Stop!" he shouted. "You'll kill her." "That's the idea," Marceline said. John appeared out of the darkness like vengeance given form, his blade taking down one of the chanting priests before they saw him coming. "Majesty, get her out!" Darius scooped Elara into his arms as the runes exploded, the shockwave ripping through the garden and scattering petals like snow. He ran for the archway, the glow from their bond burning brighter, defying the spell that tried to unmake it. They burst into the lower courtyard just as the first tower bells began to ring again, this time not for ceremony, but for pursuit. Elara pressed a trembling hand to his chest. "Darius, stop. You'll be killed." He didn't slow. "Then I'll die doing something that matters." Her vision blurred, pain and power swirling like fire under her skin. "They'll call you a traitor." He glanced down, eyes fierce. "Then let them." As they reached the outer gates, June's voice echoed behind them. "Go! I'll hold them off." Darius met his gaze once, an entire friendship in a single nod, then disappeared with Elara into the mist-shrouded forest beyond the keep. The night swallowed them. The bond pulsed between them, alive, defiant, unbroken. For the first time in 5 years, Elara didn't feel small. She felt dangerous. And somewhere behind them, in the shattered garden of moonlight and blood, the high priestess whispered to her gathered priests, "Find them, before the red moon sets." The forest kept its own secrets. Dawn filtered through pine and mist, and for the first time in years the light felt almost kind. Darius found the ruin by instinct more than memory. An old moon shrine half swallowed by ivy, its roof fallen in, its altar cracked. The stone still held the faint shimmer of blessing. He laid Elara on the steps, because it was the only place clean enough. Her skin burned with fever. The bond wound between them, like a wire too tight to hold. Every few breaths she gasped, not in pain exactly, but in the shock of something ancient rearranging her. He pressed a cool cloth to her throat, then her forehead, and muttered half a dozen prayers he'd stopped believing in long ago. "Don't," she whispered, eyes fluttering open. "It only makes them listen." "Who?" "The gods," she said. "They love the sound of desperate men." He almost smiled. "Then I'll whisper," he said. The fever broke by afternoon. She sat up slowly, wrapping his cloak around her shoulders. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was the kind of silence you earn after surviving something together. "They'll come," she said. "I know. Maybe we should let them." He looked at her, trying to read what she meant. "You want to surrender?" "No, I want to stop running." "There's a difference." He didn't argue. Running had never suited her. She had too much of the mountain in her. Too much of the part of him that wanted to stand and see what happened if they refused to kneel. Before he could answer, the air shifted. The light through the broken roof turned silver. Elara's hand clenched in his sleeve. The mark on their palms began to glow again, not warm this time, but cold, bright, divine. "They found us," she breathed. "No," he said. "She did." The light grew until the world cracked open and spilled white fire. They weren't standing on stone anymore. They were weightless. Suspended in a space made of light and reflection, the goddess's mirror realm, where time folded in on itself and truth wore no disguise. Darius drew a breath that didn't sound like his own. The air was too clean, his heartbeat too loud. Elara's hair floated around her like ink in water. The voice came from everywhere. "You run from law and call it love." It wasn't the high priestess. It was older than language. It vibrated in the bone. The light coalesced into two shapes. One dark and tall, eyes red as dawn. The other pale, eyes gold as dusk. Wolf and vampire, night and blood. Both were the goddess. Darius stepped forward, because kings are trained to address thrones, even when they don't understand what sits on them. "If you mean to punish, do it to me. The fault is mine." The goddess's twin mouths spoke together. "The fault is shared." Elara's voice was small. "Then let me speak." "Speak, child of divided blood," the light answered. She looked up. "You made me this way. You let me live between two worlds and then told both to hate me for it. I didn't choose my blood, but I choose what it means." The air shivered, almost approving. "You dare name choice in the face of fate?" Yes. She turned to Darius. We both do. The goddess spread her hands, and scenes began to unfold in the silver around them, memories drawn from their bones. The purge. The smoke. The screaming. The bell at the east gate. Her father's body swinging in wind. Darius at a table, signing decrees with ink that still smelled of blood. He closed his eyes, but the memory didn't stop. It looped until he forced himself to look. The next image was hers. 5 winters of silence. Fingers bleeding from work, learning how to watch people's mouths instead of their hearts. The night she buried her name beneath her tongue, the goddess spoke again. You are bound by blood, by law, by my own hand. But bonds forged in silence cannot rule the world. If this love is truth, then prove it. How? Darius asked. Each will speak one truth that could destroy the other, she said, and one that could save you both. Only then will I know if choice binds you tighter than destiny. He looked at Elara. If I speak, you'll hate me. She smiled faintly. Then it will match. He went first. During the purge, I knew innocence would die, he said. I told myself it was for peace, for order. But it was fear. I was afraid of losing the throne, so I let others lose everything else. Your father's name was on a list I signed. I saw it. I chose not to cross it out. The words hung there, bright as blades. Elara's heart clenched, but she didn't look away. The bond burned with his confession, and for a second she thought it would snap. Then she took a breath, and found her truth. My voice, she said, touching her throat. It's not just a sound, it's compulsion. I can make people obey. I could make you obey. I could make you love me. The goddess's twin faces leaned closer, curious. I never used it, Elara said. Not on anyone. Because if love isn't a choice, it's just another cage. Darius stepped toward her, shaking his head slowly, like he needed her to understand. You didn't have to use it, he said. You spoke, and I heard the truth. That was enough. The light around them softened. The goddess's 2 halves began to merge, one form folding into the other until only a single figure remained. Neither wolf nor vampire, but something that held both. You have spoken what you hid, she said. Now speak what you wish. Darius looked up. I want to change the law, to build a world where my crown doesn't weigh more than a life. The goddess nodded once. And you? She asked Elara. Elara's voice trembled, but she held the goddess's gaze. I want to live without pretending I'm less than I am. She looked at Darius. And I want to love you without it costing anyone else their name. The goddess's eyes turned white, endless. Then love freely, or not at all. Speak his true name, child of divided blood. Let the choice be yours. Elara knew what that meant. Names had power. To speak a true name was to bind souls forever. Not by fate, but by will. The wrong choice could kill them both. The right one could remake the world. She reached out and touched his cheek, feeling the roughness of a man who had fought too long to keep his heart from breaking. Darius Vale, she said softly, I choose you, not because I must, because I can. The goddess smiled, not kindly, but as if the universe had just learned something new. The light exploded. When the world reformed, the shrine was whole again. The roof restored, the altar gleaming. The mark on their hands was no longer silver but gold, steady as sunrise. Darius opened his eyes to find her sitting beside him, breathing evenly. Outside, the red moon was gone. The sky was pale and new. She looked at him, confused and alive. Did we win? He gave a tired laugh. I don't think it's about winning. Footsteps crunched outside, June's voice calling, half prayer, half relief. The soldiers with him dropped their weapons when they saw the glow between Elara and Darius. The mark carried its own authority now. Law bent around it like metal to a magnet. Darius helped her stand. Whatever comes next, he said. We start it together. She nodded, still shaking. The council. They'll adapt, he said. They always do when they're afraid. He took her hand, their palms fitting perfectly, light curling between their fingers. They'll call us heretics. They already did, she said. We just gave them a better story. They walked out of the shrine into morning. The forest glowed gold where sunlight met mist. The city below was waking. unaware that its gods had been rewritten in a single night. Elara turned her face toward the wind. "You can't silence the truth forever," she said. "No," Darius said. "You just have to love it loud enough that people stop pretending not to hear." They stood there until the bells of Blackspire began to ring again, this time clear, not for warning or war, but for beginning. And somewhere deep in the echo of that sound, the goddess laughed, a sound like thunder and rain and promise all at once. The mark between their hands pulsed once, warm and alive. Elara smiled. "So this is what freedom sounds like." Darius's answering smile was soft. "No," he said. "This is what choice sounds like." She leaned into him, and for the first time since her father's death, the silence she carried felt like peace, not punishment. The forest listened. The world shifted. The law changed. Just a little, to make room for something older than rules. "Tell me, do you believe love can truly change the law, or does it simply write a new one in its own image?"